Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening and watching. My name is Michelle Vallakanis, and I'm the Executive Director of the Colette Louise Tisdall Foundation. Our foundation our mission is to improve outcomes of pregnancy, childbirth, prematurity, and infancy, as well as aid in the grieving process through financial assistance, education, advocacy. Our financial assistance piece is probably what we're most known for. And through that, we have been helping many families uh, as of June 16th. I had to look at the date. As of June 16th, 2021, we've helped over 675 families in 39 states and given away more than $600,000. And our education piece is really what we're going to focus on today in this video. And I'm so excited to have Allie Dunn, who is an incredible mom, advocate, author, know-it-all, and a very good sense, know-it-all, and everything. And she's going to talk about, and we'll both kind of talk about prematurity. And so, Allie, thank you so much for being here. If you could just introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll kind of have a conversation.
Thank you, Michelle, for having me. So my name is Allie. I am the mother of identical twins that were born at 28 weeks. And my journey to motherhood started several years before that, actually about 3.5 or 4 years prior to having my twins. I started a infertility struggle, unexplained infertility struggle that took me through pretty much all the things that you can try when it comes to infertility. And then finally, after a second IVF, I was successfully pregnant with not one, but two babies, which was exciting, but also very scary to go into a high risk pregnancy. That high risk pregnancy was highly monitored, but pretty normal up until about 27 weeks when my doctor at a normal monitoring appointment noticed some preterm labor signs. I was having contractions and I didn't even realize it. And at that point, they're like, well, I'll just head over to the hospital, get an IV. I'm sure you'll feel better. And then 8 days later, I was still at the hospital on hospital bed rest. And on the day that I was supposed to go home, one of the twins had some heart rate issues. There was some distress there. So it was decided that I would have an emergency C-section that day, and they were born at 28 weeks. Since their birth, several years later, I started an organization called Me Too Books to kind of fill a void that I saw in children's literature around the idea of prematurity. So I wrote my first book, I Was a Preemie Just Like You. And since then, I've written 3 other books on topics such as twins, and I have a book about career exploration for kids. But really, all of this started as a result of a emergency C-section that landed me in this foreign place of the NICU that I really knew nothing about.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And yeah, I definitely, my sister was a preemie, and so she was 8 weeks early. And I definitely know that there really wasn't anything to explain what prematurity was, especially to kids. And so, yeah, I really thank you. And, your books are incredible, and just all the topics you have as well. So let's get into it first, right? We hear like terms like preemie, prematurity, preterm birth, right? Like we hear all these terms. What does that mean? And what does that look like generally?
Well, I can tell you, for me, that looked like something I'd never seen before. Before I had a preemie, I'd never seen a preemie. I'd never been to a NICU. I'd never even toured a NICU. And you might be thinking, Allie, you were pregnant with twins. The likelihood of them delivering early was high. Why were you so unprepared? Well, there was a plan to at some point tour the NICU. It all was just, planned after they were actually born. But for me, the preemie was something that I had never really even considered. I had very little experience with. My twins were born weighing 2 pounds 6 ounces and 1 pound 15 ounces. So just the size of a baby it's just really hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine how little their diapers are even.
Mm-hmm.
And now looking back at the size of that diaper and comparing it to other, it's hard to even believe that they were ever that small.
Right.
But yeah, I was unprepared for what I was going to see going into the NICU and with a preemie.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I really relate to your tour of the NICU because with Colette, I was in the hospital and we actually had a tour scheduled. And that morning, the doctors recommended delivery. So we were like you, we had never been, I mean, I had been inside of a NICU as a 4-year-old. But after that, I had never been in a NICU. And, obviously at 4 years old, I didn't know what I was really looking at. And, was planning to the very same day that surprise, she's going to come now. And so, yeah, it's a very interesting place and very jarring. And, to the extent anyone can explain it, can you kind of talk about what a NICU looks like and what parents might expect when they kind of like first impressions and their experience there?
One thing that I didn't expect was how traumatic it was going to be, and the whole trauma of having a preemie, being in the NICU, but also the trauma of having a birth that didn't go the way that you'd planned or expected or had hoped. And that was a very traumatic experience as well, especially I think for me as someone who had been through infertility and had struggled so much to become pregnant. And I had many years to build up expectations around what this birth would be. And after infertility, you really just want things to be normal. You want to have a normal pregnancy, you want to have a normal birth. And when those things don't happen, it is a very traumatic experience. And you might find if you are in a similar situation that trauma appears maybe a little bit later, maybe after you're home from the NICU. Because when you're in the NICU, at least for me, I found that it was very hard to process any of my own feelings, to worry about myself at all. You're just really focused on the health and well-being of your baby. The NICU environment itself is surprisingly loud. That's what I remember most about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
My twins were in a traditional kind of an open bay NICU. So we didn't have a private room. We were in a room with lots of other parents. Sometimes my twins were in the same area, depending on their progress in health, and sometimes they were in different areas. So, you may want to anticipate, especially if you're having multiples, that you may not be able to be with both of them all of the time. You may have to choose. Are you going to be spending some time with baby A or baby B during the day? But definitely the sound was something that I was just shocked by, how loud it was, how many beeps and buzzes, and at first how jarring that is and how much anxiety I had. But then after a couple of weeks, you get to learn what beeps and buzzes matter and which ones don't. And you begin to feel like, oh, no, you don't have to worry about that one. That one's fine. Or, ooh, that's not a sound that we want to hear. So those were things that were very surprising and shocking to me as a first-time NICU parent.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would definitely agree with the loud aspect. Like I feel like, people think babies and they think nursery and they think quiet, and NICU is very loud, is extremely loud. And just doesn't seem to mesh up with what I think most people think of with baby sleeping and all of that. And yeah, and we were similar in a little bit of a closed bay, but we had 2 other families in with us. And yeah, so you're hearing what they're going through and what they're doing. And there's a lot of, it can be very like oversensitive, like sensory overload.
For sure. Yeah.
And yeah. And I think also, you talked about your twins were very small. And, I think that that's also something that's very shocking is, the first time you see your child and they look so incredibly small. And I think that that's also something that you're not prepared for, right? In all of this that you go through, you're not prepared for that sight of like, oh my God, my child is so much smaller than I expected. Um, and yeah, I think that that's also like a really important thing, because when you're talking 1, 2 pounds, that is very little, when it comes to a person, to a baby.
Right. And not just a size difference. Certainly there's super tiny, but there's also, like their skin is very, very like paper thin. And you can see so many of the blood vessels and the veins underneath their skin. Sometimes the baby's eyes won't even be open. Their eyes will still be fused shut. And those are things that you just don't anticipate. And then there's also going to be babies in the NICU that aren't preemies, that are there for other reasons. And then when you look at maybe a baby who weighs 6 or 7 pounds and compared to your teeny tiny baby, it just further reinforces the fact that, wow, this baby is so small, almost to the point where those first few times where you're holding your baby, and for a lot of us, maybe we had to wait a little bit before we could hold the baby. So it was such an emotional experience to hold them the first time, but also you're very anxious. They're so small, they're so delicate. And just kind of that fear of, oh gosh, I really want to hold and bond with my baby, but I'm kind of afraid to touch the baby because they're so small and I don't want to harm them.
Right, right. Yeah. And I think, the fears that every parent, has when a newborn comes in is like, oh my God, am I going to drop the baby? Am I
Yeah.
going to, am I going to break the baby? And then when you take it down to so much smaller, and like you were saying, all of the other skin issues and everything, where it doesn't look like how I think most people imagine, a baby to look like. I think that that's really hard. And then also I would say like the wires and such, there's so many wires and needles and everything to like really add to that sort of like what is going on here um kind of feeling. So
Yeah, I found that part to be very difficult as well. That the asking like for permission or help to hold your baby. And, again, after someone who'd struggled so long to have a baby, it was just like one more thing where, they're just not quite mine yet.
mhm.
And kind of even having some fear around asking. There are some wonderful NICU nurses out there, and then there are some that run a little bit of a tighter ship maybe. And
Right.
there are days when maybe the baby needs to stay in the isolette, or there's times when you'll have to bond with them a different way. And so the idea of asking to hold your baby but being told no, not today, that was very difficult for me. That denial of that, or just seemed like just another way that I wasn't really a mom yet, or another way.
Mhm.
So I always thought that process was very difficult as
Right.
well.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I can remember at one point reaching into Colette's isolate and like a nurse telling me not to touch the way I was touching. And I don't even remember what the issue was.
Yeah.
And again, sort of feeling like, and especially, and we struggled with infertility as well, just feeling like it's just keeps getting further and further out of reach. And then to actually have a child and be like, I can't even touch them, is even more difficult. And so, yeah, so what kind of, if you were sort of doing your own virtual tour of the NICU for a future or brand new NICU parent, what kind of things would you tell them to expect in the NICU?
Well, I would expect a lot of time to be spent there. Um, I would expect, again, a lot of loud noise. I would want to empower that parent that they are not a visitor there. They are an important part, an essential part of that baby's health and well being, and to really take on that advocate role early, which is difficult. And I totally understand that. I don't think that that was something that I fully mastered until much later on in the NICU process. But I think that that's something that you should anticipate doing early on, and really viewing yourself as an important member of the baby's care team. In fact, probably the most important member. And I would also encourage them to, get comfortable, find a comfortable spot, find a routine that they can incorporate into their daily lives, because a lot of time is spent in the NICU for most preemies. And so the quicker you can kind of incorporate that NICU experience into your daily life, and knowing that everyone has a lot of other responsibilities as well. There may be other children at home. You have a job you have to think about, all those other just, daily responsibilities. And to also give yourself grace. Like, if you can't be there all day, every day, that's okay. You can only do the best that you can do. And whatever amount of time that you can spend with your baby is important.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. And I do think, like, there's just overwhelming research about how much better babies do when parents are really involved in their care. And, I do think that that's like an important part of everything. But also at the same time, like you said, giving yourself grace, especially for those who were the birthing parent. You're also recovering from birth, and an emergency C-section can really do a number on you if that's the case, or even a vaginal birth, whatever. And so being mindful of your own physical and emotional limitations, I think, is really key and really important. So yeah, no, that's a great overview of doing things. When you talk about a routine, what kind of things do you think were helpful for you in sort of establishing your routine and the comfort level that, the most you can do in a NICU, which is a little bit hard, but what do you feel like worked for you and what was helpful for you?
Well, in my situation, they were my only children. So I didn't have those other responsibilities at home. And I was I'd started my maternity leave already. So I started that early. So I didn't really have work responsibilities to think about. So I had the luxury to kind of dedicate the majority of most of my days there in the NICU. And so I would, kind of have a schedule of getting up, getting to the hospital, making sure that I had all of my pumping supplies that I would need, knowing that I would be pumping several times throughout the day while I was at the hospital. I spent a lot of time just sitting by the isolettes, and a lot of time, because of the structure of the NICU being open, that was a lot of time just kind of sitting with the nurses. As the nurses were doing their work, I was kind of sitting there quietly, bonding with the baby, either with kangaroo care and holding, or my favorite thing to do was, reading to my babies while they were there. But just having presence in the NICU allowed me to kind of build a trust and a bond with many of the nurses, just because I was there so much. And I think that did two things. In one way, it was helpful to me because I began to feel much more comfortable. When I did leave the NICU, I felt more comfortable leaving my babies in the hands of these nurses, because I felt like I knew them so much more,
right,
spending so much time with them. But I also think it created kind of an unknown problem of, because I was there all the time, because I was doing all the things that NICU moms should. I was pumping, I was doing lots of holding and doing all the cares, every 4 hours there. I gave off the impression of being just a preemie super mom. Like I had it all together. I was transitioning great and things were going well. And I don't know if that was really an accurate picture. And I do wish that at some point a nurse or someone would have said, "Hey, are you doing okay? How are you feeling about all this? Are you processing all the trauma that you've gone through?" And if I was answering honestly, I would have said, "No, I'm not doing any of that. I'm pushing all of that to the side and focusing on being, this super parent, and trying not to fail at being a preemie mom, like I felt like I'd failed at a pregnancy, like I felt that I'd failed at getting pregnant and staying pregnant and all of these other things." So I think it's so important for NICU parents to know that it's okay to not be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you can ask for help, and you can have conversations with people. Let people know that you're really struggling, and no one's going to think less of you. No one's going to say, oh well, she's not going to be able to handle this. I mean, what you've gone through is very traumatic, and it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to struggle a little bit. And I wish I would have let some of that struggle show a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great point. I feel like you were almost like in my head of like the things that I was thinking and that have thought since our experience. And yeah, I think that's so true. I mean, there's so much, the trauma of giving birth earlier than you expected, right? And just, even things like thinking like, we haven't bought a crib yet and we haven't bought a car seat and all of that stuff of like, in your head. And dealing with that. And I think then also adding in the trauma of birth and, usually not a birth that's anywhere like what you had imagined or expected.
A birth plan did not get used.
Right, exactly. Right, exactly. And like I think of a friend of mine who had preemies, and she talks about she had these visions of water births and all of this stuff, and she was like, that clearly goes out the window. And so I think that that's something of that's a loss, right? Like it's a loss of, this is how I expected my foray into having a child to go, and it's not anything like this, and in fact it's way worse than I could have imagined. And yeah, and I think we do as just generally, we kind of forget about the birthing parent and just the parents in general once baby's born, right? And that's a problem, especially in these situations where there's a lot of trauma and a lot more risk for postpartum issues and mental health issues and all of that comes through. So I think that that's really great. I also like that you say, like, I gave off this feeling like I was preemie super mom. And I just think of like other parents who were around and probably, felt then they weren't doing enough. And I think that that's also something just to kind of like focus in on what you're doing and providing and everything, and not comparing to other parents and other things. So yeah, that's a great kind of thing. I happen to think you are a super mom, but I understand that we don't always feel like that. So I think that that's like a really important aspect as well. So yeah, definitely. So you talked a little bit about kangaroo care, and I know that's a big component of NICU life. But can you talk a little bit about what that experience is like and what, it looked like for you and thoughts you had about it and all of that?
So I was lucky to be able to hold one of my twins within 24 hours of their birth. And my partner was able to hold the other one within the same amount of time. So, and I know that's not the case for all families. So I felt very lucky in that we were able to hold them fairly quickly. It definitely is such an emotional experience to hold your child for the first time. I mean, I think every parent
right.
can relate to that. But when you add on top of that the trauma of the birth, their very small stature, all the wires, all the people around, all the people it takes to just get the baby out and to you, it's not quite that idyllic, calm, mother-child bonding experience that you have in mind. I mean, it's wonderful. It's lovely. It's one of my favorite memories, the first time getting to hold them. But again, like with everything else, and I think a very good lesson for parenting in general, it's not what I expected.
Right.
If having a preemie will teach you anything, it's that parenting is nothing like you expected.
Right.
So that was certainly the case. And I even remember times when we got to hold both of the babies together, which was very special, because not only was I able to bond with both of them at the same time, but they were bonding with each other, and they would reach out and put their arms around each other, and you couldn't help but think that, oh, they're reunited, time in the womb when they're just so happy to see each other. So
Right.
that was a very special experience as well. So yes, kangaroo care is one of those favorite things that you spend so much time doing in the NICU, but it's not the only way to bond either with your baby. And I think a lot of times we think on those days when we can't hold that, I'm not going to have a strong bond with my baby. But there are lots of other ways that babies bond with us. And, I also spent lots of time reading to them, singing to them, just talking to them. Sometimes I would read children's books to them, but sometimes I would read a book that I was reading and just read it out loud to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And also using scent, using the little, lots of NICUs have different little scent things that you put in your shirt and that collect your scent and you can put in the isolate. So there's lots of other ways that you can bond with your baby. So if you're not able to hold, you can still, just by being there and talking to them, you can still bond with them. And I think that's important too, because I do think that's a concern that lots of parents have. Am I going to be able to bond
Mm-hmm.
with my baby when I can't hold them all the time, or when I can't pick them up whenever I want to, or whenever I feel like they need to be held? So there's lots of other ways to bond too. But yes, kangaroo care is one of those things that I'd never really heard of before I was a NICU parent, but afterwards, it's something that you can never forget. It's one of the most magical, therapies that you can do with a baby.
Right. Right.
And even now, my kids still love to be held in that way. That's one of their favorite places to cuddle up, kind of in that kangaroo position. So that's something that sticks with them long after NICU time.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah. And I like that you called it sort of a therapy, because we've seen benefits of, how it helps babies lower heart rate and, thrive better and do better. And I think also that it's helping parents, reducing, the risk of postpartum depression gets reduced a little bit with it, especially continued on and things like that. So I do think it's very much like a therapy. And I know like our son, who is 11 months old now, even though he wasn't a preemie, I like definitely like went to the kangaroo care out of like just natural. And now if he gets overstimulated, like Sunday we had a lot of people over unexpectedly, and he was overstimulated, and I went back to kangaroo care and calmed him down and just got him out of that overstimulation so he could sleep. And so I think that it has amazing benefits, and I'm glad that your twins still feel like that's where they go back to. That's their like comfort spot, because I think that's really powerful as well, for
Yeah.
sure, for sure. And so I know like, and I can talk a little bit about this as well, but I had some issues really bonding with Colette. I didn't, other people read to her. I just didn't feel that like comfort level to read to her. And I did talk to her, but not as much as I would have liked. What are some tips you would have for sort of, maybe getting over that, like this doesn't feel really comfortable, or it feels sort of odd to be doing this? What would you suggest?
And I understand what you're saying, because especially when you're in a NICU with lots of other parents and nurses and doctors and techs and all the people around, sometimes you feel kind of ridiculous having conversations through the glass windows. So I certainly understand that feeling, and I think initially I had a lot of those feelings as well. But I think it was the encouragement of the nurses. The more time I spent there, the more comfortable that I was. And because I spent so many hours and so many days there, I kind of began to feel like a fixture kind of in the background. And I realized that the other parents in the room, the nurses, no one's paying attention to what I'm doing. Everyone's
Right.
focused on their own thing. And so I began to feel more comfortable in that way, and also just more educated in actually how beneficial those things were.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of had to put aside some of my discomfort and some of my embarrassment initially to get to the point where I realized how important that was. And also it was important for me because of the hours that I was spending there. And sometimes I was holding a baby at the same time, but those things are also kind of therapeutic for me to read, to listen to music, just to have someone to talk to, or to listen. So it was also a good experience for me. So it was part of my self-care.
Right.
To think about, well, this is a special time that I can sit with my baby, but I can also do something that I enjoy. I can read a book. I can listen to a podcast, without earbuds so that the babies could hear as well, or listen to soft music, and to kind of drown out some of those beeps and buzzes. So those were all things that were beneficial to me as well.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that that's great. And I think, what you said earlier about giving yourself grace, I think if, it takes a little bit of time to get to those points, that's okay. And I think, doing it in whatever way looks normal for you and looks good for you, and not necessarily, I wish I had done a little bit more of that, of like, just reading a book, I would read, instead of, some of the children's books, which feels a little wonky to be reading through, like glass, to doing this.
Like, how do I show the picture? Do I show the
Right,
picture?
right. Like, what am I doing? Yeah, exactly. So I think those are all really great tips. And yeah. So tell me a little bit about, life after the NICU, right? So, I mean, I think we spend a lot of time, talking about NICU and what life looks like there. But hopefully, we're hoping the just like in the case of your twins, that babies are going home and they're, getting to those points where it's safe to go home. What does life look like after you leave the NICU with babies?
So I'm so glad that you asked this question, because this is something that I didn't spend a whole lot of time considering. Like, from the moment that your baby's in the NICU, you are like on the clock. When can they come home? When can they come home? When can they come home? Like, you're constantly asking that. And you feel like, well, that's the end. As soon as they're home, that's the end of the journey. We're done with the NICU. And had I known then what I know now, I would know that, well, that's just the beginning, actually. And I would have spent a lot more time thinking about what's life going to look like once they're home, versus just thinking so much about getting them home in the first place. So, as I've mentioned before, the setup of the NICU that they were in, I didn't have a lot of time just with them, like me and them, without other assistants with nurses. And I had never spent the night. We never roomed in. That wasn't an option in the NICU. So I had, two tiny babies that I had never cared for by myself overnight, and that I'd never been solely, responsible for. Now, my twins did come home at different times. So one came home, and then 10 days later, the other one came home. I had never even considered that either.
Right.
Like, I never thought, oh, they may not come home together, and they may come home with different needs. Someone may come home on oxygen, I never even had thought about that. And really, probably for me, the hardest part of the NICU experience was those 10 days where I had a baby at home that was not allowed to come back to the NICU under any circumstances, not even as a visitor for the other twin. So I had to figure out, how am I now going to split my time between a tiny baby at home that I am solely responsible for, and another baby who's still in the NICU, who still needs, me, and who I've been spending every day with up until this point. So those 10 days were very, very difficult. I felt so torn, so guilty about where am I supposed to spend my time and how am I supposed to do this. And then when they were both home, getting to the realization of, okay, now not only do I have, two babies to take care of, which is a common thought of every twin parent, but there's still so little. They still need so much additional assistance that a normal newborn doesn't need. And how am I going to manage all of those? And I can't say that I have like these great, parenting hacks about how to make that all happen. But what I can say is that I really wish I would have thought a little bit more about life after the NICU, um, what it would look like on a day-to-day basis. I do think I spent a lot of time worrying about what will they come home from the NICU with? Will there be long-term, issues or problems that we'll need to deal with? I did think about that kind of in a long-term way, but I don't think I thought about like the day after they're released from the NICU, what's that going to look like?
Right.
What is our day-to-day going to look like?
Right.
And I probably, maybe I wasn't thinking about that. Maybe it was a coping mechanism. Sorry. So maybe subconsciously I was avoiding that on purpose. But I do think that it's important to realize that the NICU is not the end. It's just the beginning of more, of different, a new normal, whatever those things may be. Even with babies who come home from the NICU and are doing well health-wise, it's still just a new experience. So really important, I think, for parents to prepare themselves and to really think about, to kind of reframe their thinking about the NICU, as I was in a hurry to like, let's get this NICU over with so we can be done with it. And really you're never over it. It's always going to be a part of your life and a part of your child's story.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Right. And I imagine that, just like every parent reacts and worries about everything, it's so much more heightened when you've had that experience. And, especially if there are more long-term issues medically, then that's even more heightened. So I think that can be very stressful. And I think that, sort of like self-care is even more important when they get home, because I know you shared that really the trauma came out more once they were home. And I think that that's common, right? Like that release of like the trauma of NICU, but then that fear of like NICU was protective of my kids. And, they did everything that they could. And now me, who, doesn't have those skills, is just like left to, raise these kids without any of that help and any of the machines and all of that. So
yeah, I mean, it's startling sometimes to think about how, the day before they're released, they're under the care of this team of experts and some of the top medical technology, and then they're literally just sending them home with me, no training, like, here's a couple of brochures and some printed out, paperwork, and that's it. You're good to go. And I'm like, wait, are we sure about this? Are we sure? And I remember like one of the best things that one of the nurses did, it was leading up close to the time when we knew that they would be coming home. And one of the nurses reached behind me and she turned all the monitors around. And I said, oh, what are you doing? She's like, you're not going to have these monitors at home. Looking at them. So look at your baby. You don't need to focus on the monitors. You need to look at the baby and start focusing here, because these things aren't going to be home with you. And you got to get comfortable with taking care of the baby and looking here and not at the monitors. And she was right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really powerful because, that's true. I think the monitors are there and they're so big and they're so present and they make noises that we're, of course, focusing on that. And so, that's one of the great transitions. So, I definitely appreciate that. So, I always like to ask people, what are some things if people watching are, maybe they're the grandparents of NICU babies or friends of the parents or anything like that. And, everyone wants to like do something and help. What do you think was helpful and what do you think was not so helpful?
One thing I really wish that more people would have done was say, congratulations, you had a baby, you had your two babies, that is so exciting. And even though the situations surrounding the birth were scary, and even though the outcome was unknown, We were still parents. It was still exciting. And I think the birth of any baby deserves to be celebrated. And I think that sometimes people just don't really know what to say. And so they end up not saying anything. And it can feel like you went through this monumentous experience of giving birth, having babies, and no one is saying anything about it. And so I think regardless of the outcome, saying congratulations on the birth of your baby is something that I so longed to hear for so many years. And so I think that's always a great thing to say. And we can do a lot of those traditional things that we do when term babies are born, getting someone a gift. Mm-hmm. Now, being mindful of the type of gift that you send is helpful. Certainly sending, full size, newborn clothes to a baby who is in an isolette who's not wearing clothing at all maybe isn't the most thoughtful of gifts. Or sending a pack of diapers that your baby probably won't be able to wear for months and months, not the most thoughtful of gifts. But there certainly are things that are great for preemies, like very small knitted hats, a journal that the parents can use to write down their thoughts and to kind of keep track of the NICU experience. I'm obviously a big proponent of children's books, so send a book that that they can add to their child's library, but also that they could read while in the NICU. I think all of those are very appropriate, thoughtful gifts that kind of meet the parents where they're at, mm-hmm. and are something that they can use right now. That really helps them feel more like a real parent who is going through these very traditional experiences that most parents go through. And then also offering to help. How can I help you? Can I bring you a meal? Can I help take care of the other kids that you have? Can I let your dog out? Can I mow your yard? Those types of things, taking some of that off of the plate of the parent so that they can spend more time at the NICU, I think is really a great thing to do. And being very specific about how you can help someone. Just saying, oh, let me know if you need anything. Well, you're probably never going to get contacted by that parent, right? But if you're very specific and say, I would like to bring you a meal, I can do it on this day, or providing, gift cards to places that are close to the hospital so that the parents feel like they can take a little break, go have lunch or something away from the hospital. I think that's always a great idea as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that definitely all makes sense. And I know we didn't end up taking her up on this, but one of the most touching things was my sister-in-law said, I can go to your house and do laundry. And it was like, or she's like, and if you don't want me using your washer and dryer, I'll just take it with and I'll, bring it back. And, that was huge, right? Like just something so simple was so huge. And I think, being very specific of, what you're offering, what you're willing to do is so nice, because when you sort of say like, let me know if you need anything, I think in those trauma situations, you can't even think of what you could really need. So I think being very mindful and very, respectful of, hey, why don't I do this? Those kinds of things, I think is really nice, is really helpful. And so I think those are great.
Because I think sometimes you don't realize like the mental load of being at the NICU all day and then going home and realizing you still have all these other things that you need to do. You still need to cook dinner and do the laundry and do all the other things that you do. But having someone take some of that stuff off of your plate is very helpful.
Right. Sure. Yeah, definitely. So what kind of, just sort of general, like if you had to give some tips, some tricks to NICU families, what would you give?
I would say some of the things that I wish I had done a little bit better were to take more pictures. Mm-hmm. And I certainly have pictures. I didn't realize though at the time how much I would look back on this experience and how I would change the way I felt about it. Like when you're going through it, I think you kind of want it to hurry up and be over. You want to just move on. But then looking back, it is kind of a very sacred time, something that I just wish that I had more pictures of. And you'll be surprised too that how much some preemies as they grow will be really interested in hearing about their own
Right.
story and about
Right.
how they were born so small and now they're much bigger. And so I wish I had more of those pictures and more pictures um, with me in them, more pictures of me there, proof of mom, proof of dad, proof of parent pictures there to show that, that we went through this experience as a family. And I also wish I'd done a little better job of recording the kind of minutia. I think I created at the time a blog to kind of just share with my family and friends updates of kind of the big level stuff, um, which I think is another good tip of finding a way to share with everybody who's invested in the process how baby's doing without having to be on the phone and going over it over and over and over again, which is very taxing at the end of a long day. You don't want to talk about it over and over again. So finding a point person who you can tell the information to that they can disseminate it, or using technology, social media, a blog, something like that, that you can keep private, that you can still share the updates on what's happening with your babies. So I did do that, and I shared kind of high level, information, but I do wish that for my own personal records, I would have kept a little bit more of the minutia of what was happening day to day, and also what I was feeling day to day.
Right.
I think it really would have been helpful for my recovery and for my transition and for dealing with my trauma had I spent a little bit more time reflecting, a little bit more introspective time on how I was feeling and how I was processing through the whole situation.
Right. Right. Yeah, no, that definitely all makes sense. And I think that that's so very true. That, looking back, right? Like even when you were in the weeds and you felt like, oh, these weren't that important of things, like looking back on it now and seeing that there were so many, little moments that were a lot bigger than we necessarily gave them credit for in the meantime. So yeah, I definitely think that that's all very true. And yeah, I like you. I find a lot of power in writing and sharing the stories and commemorating, those moments. And so I think that's really true and that's really helpful. Yeah, and I think one thing I do want to say, based on your thing about point persons, I think that's huge. And I also think it's a good reminder to loved ones of like, sometimes you don't want to just repeat everything and you don't want to hear everything. And so respecting that, parents are going to give you when they need the to kind of talk about it and they want to talk about it, they're going to do it, and when they don't push, and that kind of thing. So yeah. So well, we're getting close to wrapping up, so anything else that you want to share about your experiences or work you're doing now or anything of that nature?
I would like to share with all parents that I think it's important at some point, and it doesn't have to be something that is grand or public even, but I do think I personally have found so much healing in sharing my story, talking about my experiences, much more than I ever expected, that it would be such an important part of my process of healing and my process of acceptance. So I would certainly encourage all parents to do that. And, it doesn't have to be something that you share with the masses, but even just talking to your partner or talking to a friend, going through your whole story and sharing how you felt about that, it really can be a healing experience. And I also have found really, great healing and a great way of moving forward is to really give back to this experience. So either making a donation of goods or services to the NICU where your child maybe was, or working with great organizations and making donations that way, or donating your time. I really think that that's something that has been very crucial for me, and I think a really great way to kind of bring the whole experience around back to the beginning, wrap it up, And I think it's a really great way to help to move forward and to feel like there is, there's lots of good that can come from this trauma and this experience as well.
Right, right. Yeah, definitely. No, I think that's a great, talk about it. And I think it makes us better parents when we can kind of look through that and, see. I know that I am a better mom because of everything I went through, and that I don't like sweat the small things, right? So like just, he's messy sometimes and he eats and he's messy and I just think, well, messes can be cleaned up and things like that. So I think that's also really important.
Yeah, I'm surprised at the amount of, I would say that the NICU experience gave me such a huge amount of gratitude, of just being a parent, because I know that, I almost missed that chance.
Right.
And so I am grateful to be witness to the mess. I'm grateful to change the diapers. I'm grateful to do those things that sometimes we kind of associate with, the yucky parts of parenting, because I knew how close I was to not having any of it at all.
Right.
So it definitely has made me a much more grateful and patient parent,
Mm-hmm.
definitely able just to live in the moment and to appreciate it and enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, thank you, Allie, so much for your time and your sharing your story and your experiences. We really appreciate this. Contact information for Allie as well as for the foundation are going to be in the notes of this video. And so we would love to hear from you. Love to hear, anyone's stories. So thank you so much, Allie. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for
Bye-bye.
having me. It's fun. Bye.
Thanks.